Morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the first India Forum on China. Now the panel is already on stage. I dare not keep them waiting. To the second session, and I invite Partnership the Menon guests on stage. We have and Maguo from Japan.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain. And welcome everybody. We discuss very much. Let's go straight into the session on the instruments and drivers of China's great far ambition. We have three remarkable speakers actually speak on different aspects of this. We'll begin with Dr. Chisaku Masuo, who's an associate professor at the Graduate School of Social and Cultural Studies at Kyushu University. And will be speaking on recent developments in Chinese maritime administration beyond its maritime territory. After that, we'll ask Ambassador Anirwadha to speak on Chinese investments in Europe. Ambassador Wadhwa, as many of you know, former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, he's been ambassador in several countries. And lastly, we'll ask Dr. Arjun Gupta, Director of the Vivekananda International Foundation, to speak on China's cyber capability and its impact on regional security. And then we'll open it up to a discussion. Hopefully we'll have a fair amount of time. We have 90 minutes. So, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Today, I have prepared PowerPoint presentation, and today I would like to speak about Chinese state oceanic administration and how it proceeds its bureaucratic efforts to establish establish China as a maritime superpower. The next slide, please. It's been very difficult for me to use this slide. How should I do this? Can I stand up? Maybe I should hold this. This is a very typical map describing the UNCLOS maritime system. And I don't think I really need to talk about this, but of course in this map, the important line comes here between territorial sea and exclusive marine economic zone or contiguous zone, because up until territorial sea, there extends the sovereignty of a coastal country, right? And then after this line, one coastal country can have jurisdiction rights or sovereign rights up until the end of this EEZ. Please. However, Chinese understanding of the maritime order is slightly different. This is a map described on PLA Daily, and the most important line comes here between so-called maritime territory and the international public water. And China doesn't really differentiate much about territorial water or EEZ or continental shelf, and they tend to emphasize coastal countries' sovereignty or jurisdiction rights within this maritime territory. And when you say territory, it really sounds like one country has sovereignty over the entire area. Next slide, please. However, within 3 million square kilometers of jurisdiction water, China claims, in fact, 51% duplicates with other countries' claims, according to the domestic statistic of China. And that's equals to the size of one Mongolia. So by claiming such a huge water, China is also like carrying huge international bombs because those areas can be the duplicated area can cause international conflicts. And if you look at this duplicated water from the international point, because it's disputed by many with other claimant states, the responsible authority for such water within the Chinese domestic system, the bureaucratic system, is MOFA. However, if you stress that China does have the jurisdiction rights up until that area, it's a domestic matter. And that falls onto the state oceanic administration to take care of that water. And that's why today I'm going to talk about state oceanic administration in order to understand China's bureaucratic understanding on the maritime affairs. Next slide, please. I don't have time to talk about the historical developments of the state oceanic administration, or I would just call it SOA at this point. But SOA has been paying continuous bureaucratic efforts, to make it short, SOA has been paying continuous bureaucratic efforts to protect Chinese maritime interests, both in maritime territory, China claims, and also the international public water since 1970s, when China just joined the United Nations. Because then, during that period, the discussions for UNCLOS was going on, and Chinese delegates were really surprised to see the international developments. And but SOA had been a backseat player within China's domestic system for a long time. But its relationship with the central leadership has changed dramatically because of the domestic nationalism. And critical year came in 2006 when SOA established regular patrolling system in East China Sea against Japan to demonstrate that the government is doing showing a strong resolve against Japan, because at that time there was Koizumi's Yasukuni Shrine, and there was rising domestic nationalism, and also there was the gas development issue rising in the East China Sea. So the Hu Jintao administration really needed to show the domestic public that China is doing okay, the leadership is doing okay. So that's why it allowed the regular patrolling system in East China Sea. However, what was ironic was that because SOA is a bureaucracy, of course it had to expand that system into all of Chinese jurisdiction water or maritime territory, because that's how the bureaucracy works, right? So in the next year, SOA expanded the system into Yellow Sea and also South China Sea. And that's when the international disputes started with the Vietnamese and Philippines and those countries. Because up until then, China was doing okay in the South China Sea. And all of a sudden, the situation changed. And from here, I would like to talk about one example, how SOA has been establishing its bureaucratic system within its, for this case, within its territorial, maritime territory. And I would like to talk about an example on island protection law that became effective in 2010, because that actually pushed China to go for the reclamation of lands. Next slide, please. I don't have time to talk in detail about this island protection law, but I think in my studies, I think everything started with this law. This law was made to protect all of Chinese islands, and it pushed domestic authorities, not only SOA, but also many local governments to protect its islands. And clarification of administration system over those islands were created based on this law, and also many following domestic administrative documents issued by SOA. And what was interesting was that based on that law, China and SOA created a new island protection program as a national action plan to promote the protection over those islands. And the first, there are two versions. One is national version, and the other one is provincial versions issued by each provinces or provincial governments. And the first first action plans are targeted from 2011 to 2010. So, up until 2010, China really needs to, Chinese bureaucracy has to have achievements described in this action plan. And actually, even though, and the National Action Plan actually does made plans for Parasol Islands and Scarborough and also Spratlys. And the Scarborough and Spratlys part is is excluded from the public version. So we only see the title, but we know that the plans were created in this action plan. And also, if you look at the Parasol part, it describes that they're going to create the transfer hub for somewhere else. So they're actually, I think in my understanding, they did create the reclamation plan within this action plan. So let's see what's going to happen up until 2010. What was interesting was that provinces are also essentially forced to develop maritime economy to proximity islands to provide the backbone for Chinese administration over the peripheral islands. And if you ask me some questions about this one, I'd be very interested. I'd be very happy to answer. Next slide, please. And based on those efforts, this is the Chinese island management system created by SOA. So China categorized its islands this way. The first habited islands are usually managed by the local governments, provincial local governments. But within the inhabited islands, those that are proximity to the coastal area are categorized as islands for regular usage. And by creating the land leasing system, China is actually encouraging provincial governments. The central government is encouraging provincial governments to establish maritime economy and coastal economy. And within the inhabited islands, they also created another category called islands for special usage. And it is also categorized into three groups. One is territorial baseline islands, and the second one is islands for defense usage, and the third one is oceanic nature preservation islands. And the first and third categories, those islands are managed by the central as well as local governments. And if you look at the island list of the if you look at the islands list managed by provincial governments, you don't find names of Parasols and Scabrous. And if you exclude those categories, you can gradually reach a conclusion that those islands China is filling is categorized as islands for defense usage. And what is interesting is that according to the island protection law, those islands for defense usage, are prohibited to be used for the purposes not related to the military, or not related to the defense purposes. So those islands have to be used for the defense use. And also, China is very keen on preserving the natural status. So if you want to change the natural status according to the law, you really have to go through the revision process, national revision process, to change the circumstances. So when it came to that point, it is SOA who has to review that kind of plan. So from this, domestic system, we can see that the reclamation plans were probably put forward by the military, but military had to cooperate very well with SOA in advance. And because SOA is under the State Council, State Council and PLA are in the equal position within the Chinese system. And who can make the final decision? It's only Xi Jinping. So China, when it comes to the maritime administration or maritime governance, China does have created very detailed domestic system to manage it. And up until here, I talked about how China tried to consolidate its governance over its own maritime territory. And from now on, I would like to talk about how China is doing with other parts of the sea on the international public water. China is now trying to create this. I don't need to introduce this Belt and Road Initiative, but according to Chinese understanding, it's for the human community. And what is interesting to see SOA is that their relationship with the central government has been changing all the time. So in later Hu Jintao administration, SOA that was the SOA's golden period, because all of a sudden this maritime issue became so big, and Hu Jintao didn't know what to do, so he basically accepted SOA's proposal, also pushed by the PLA. However, Xi Jinping is quite different. He started to have very strong control over SOA. So under Xi Jinping, SOA really had to shift its work focus from its maritime territory to the international maritime space, because now SOA's any kinds of activities within the maritime territory is strictly controlled by the central government. And now, as a bureaucracy, it has more freedom to create new things in the international maritime space. And when they talk about it, they emphasize the importance of two poles, deep seas, seabeds, and oceans. And if you are paying attention to China's scientific activities, China is doing pretty aggressively. China has created this deep water submarine, and it has established world records by diving into more than 10,000 meters, and going to Antarctica, Arctic, any places. And China is doing a lot of scientific research, including on the Indian Ocean. And In June 2017, SOA released the Vision for Maritime Cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative, together with the National Development and Reform Commission. And that was actually the first SOA's document in relation to the international relations, in relation to Chinese diplomacy, because up until then, people recognized SOA to be just handling some maritime functional issues. But then it was the first time for SOA to release such a diplomatic document. And if you read that document, it is very interesting. It basically talked about maritime Silk Road. But up until then, when people were talking about Chinese maritime Silk Road, they usually refer to this one line that goes through the Indian Ocean and gradually to the Europe, and the other one goes through the South Pacific and probably drifting towards Latin America gradually. But within this document, China proposed the third maritime Silk Road that goes through the Arctic. Yeah, and within the same document, China emphasized the importance of creating a functional Beidou system that can achieve more accurate weather forecast within the Arctic, because this line is very important economically. Once the Arctic ice is melt, and when if ships can go through, use this line, then it can reduce 30% of its way to Europe. But in order to secure ships' safety, of course, we had to increase the accuracy of the weather forecast to protect the security of the ships. But in the same time, China is proposing or pushing Russia to accept this Beidou system. And well, I first thought Russia would not accept it. But when I interviewed some scholars in China, one Russian expert who is also familiar with the military issue, well, expressed that Russia has already accepted, so they have already agreed to have cooperation with the satellite system, with between Chinese Beidou and also Russia's GLONASS. And he emphasized the importance of this, because then that means that two countries are going to share the ballistic missile information, right? So China is it's still a rumor level, and I haven't confirmed it by any documents. But there are so many, it kind of pushes a lot of imagination to think about this issue. And so now, by promoting this maritime Silk Road, China is really pushing this Beidou to be used, Beidou system to be used by many the developing countries, including the ones in Africa, because then when they expand the number of users, then they can also increase the accuracy for the information, right? And while promoting peaceful cooperation with Silk Road partners internationally, it is pushing civil-military fusion as a domestic development strategy. Next slide, please. So when China talks about the maritime issues domestically, now it's been very popular to talk about this civil-military fusion. I see there is a certain difference between China's narratives toward the international society and toward the domestic society. To illustrate it visually, I just prepared some pictures here. This is a picture of an exhibition on 5-year achievement under Xi Jinping's governance, and it was held from October October to November this year, right, when they had this 19th Party Congress. And this exhibition was basically for those in the for the domestic public. I saw a lot of students and also soldiers who were watching at those exhibitions. And they also had this special corner for on the exhibition on the civil-military fusion upgraded to a national strategy by Chairman Xi. And they explain that the first case to demand a civil tanker, the first case for the civil military fusion was this tanker. And in 2013, China demanded this POSCO shipping company to convert their civil tanker to have dual-use purposes. And there was another example of huge cargo ships to be to have the good quality to hold some of the military how do you call it to host some helicopters and also some military trucks. And in Chinese eyes, this is also a fine case of civil-military fusion, and this is the very close reef in Spratly Islands. So, when of course the Spratly Islands are meant for basically mainly for the defense use, but by promoting it, by using it for the civil purposes, it can also argue that those islands are meant for civil use, but to the international society. But the main use is for, of course, the defense use. And this is another case of civil-military fusion, and this is about Beidou satellite system, and warfare combat is also there. And China, to think about it, it looks also a little scary, because China is encouraging many Silk Road partners to use Beidou system to develop their economies. Of course, they can use it for that purpose too, but in the same time, those Silk Road partners are also contributing for China to achieve better military information. So, today I just talked about some fragmented information on the China's new activities beyond its maritime territory. But from those from those examples, we can say that China has been vigorously promoting maritime Silk Road cooperation by suggesting developmental support for its partners. And SOA has been working hard to win the influence in the international public water, mainly through scientific researches combined with some other measures. And China is trying to provide the international public service by offering a free Beidou system that come together with cheap Chinese products. And of course, the core information of Beidou is not shared by those partners. And the 19th Party Congress endorsed civil-military fusion and acceleration of maritime strong power construction. And receiving that new direction, SOA is pushing to establish integrated maritime planning for dual purposes after the Congress. And combining those information, well, it's still a guess. But I have a feeling that China is trying to establish systematic path toward a new maritime hegemony. You know, when they had the reclamation, they did have a lot of systematic efforts. And looking at those fragmented information, I think China is doing pretty much the same. China is moving to take over, or at least to parallel to the U.S. supreme position in the global politics. And China is trying to establish a new and long-lasting international system favorable to itself by providing international public goods and demonstrating itself to be a benign supreme power. But essentially, China is trying to become a new hegemon. And China is also, in my eyes, China is also preparing to use those public goods as a systematic tool to stabilize its military supremacy. And Chinese developmental support can be used as a tool to consolidate its rising power in the world, not only in economic but also in security domains. However, of course, that's the Chinese dream. But it is not yet clear if China is capable to make other countries accept such new Chinese hegemony. And that was the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. My topic is on Chinese investments in Europe, and the way I'll talk about it is essentially to present the issue in perspective. I'll talk a little bit about OBOR and the projects that the Chinese have undertaken in Europe under OBOR, how it has evolved, and also the shifting patterns of Chinese investments in Europe, the recent acquisitions, and then the reaction which has come about. So that is how this presentation will go. Let me just put the issue in perspective first. When at the 19th Chinese Communist Party Congress in October, as we've been told since yesterday, President Xi Jinping was very clear that the goal is to place China firmly on the global stage by 2050. And this goal will be driven in part by Chinese investments in both industrialized as well as developing countries. So what happened in 2008 is that the financial crisis left Europe with an estimated euro 330 billion investment gap. That was the time that the Chinese spotted this opportunity and boosted investments in Europe massively, which have happened really since 2010. Europe has a free trade policy, as we all know, but now faces a difficult circumstance because of Chinese buying. There's an acquisition onslaught, and that has also, it comes with an emergence of a combination of state-owned large conglomerates and aggressive Chinese policies of investment in Europe's technology and infrastructure sectors. If you look at what happened earlier, Chinese investments had focused mainly on infrastructure projects, and this was mainly in the distressed southern European countries, since the economic crisis had offered some opportunities in countries like Portugal, in Greece, Italy, and in Spain. But stronger concerns have now arisen because the recent Chinese targeting is that in Northern Europe, with an eye on the technology sector. Let's talk a little bit about the OBOR policy. Officially, OBOR was launched in autumn of 2013 as a foreign policy priority, as opposed to a well-defined strategy, if you might call it that. The stated aim at that time, and I remember attending that conference myself in Assam, was greater economic integration within Asia, between Asia and Europe, and between Asia and Africa, mainly through connectivity and also through infrastructure projects like with transport, energy, and telecommunications being emphasized in the first phase. It was generally understood at that point in time that the origin and the motivation of launching OBOR stemmed from a push for development of the Chinese western regions, the export of overcapacity and excess savings against political and strategic considerations of the Chinese leadership. So by and large, the European response to OBOR projects has been enthusiastic. Formal OBOR projects in the EU have traditionally involved container terminals and railways. For example, China now has a controlling stake in the Greek port of Piraeus. Chinese companies have either invested or have shown interest in investments in many countries across Europe in this sector, like Belgium, Netherlands, Croatia, Slovenia, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Latvia, and Lithuania. And in the railway sector, the planned construction of a new Belgrade-Budapest railway by Chinese companies has been particularly notable. In addition, Chinese-Europe rail services are increasing in number and in frequency, and freight companies from China today connect cities in Poland, in Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Spain. And several European airports have also attracted Chinese investments. That includes Germany, Toulouse in France. There's been expressions of interest in Greece, in Castelli. Chinese companies like Costco also provide logistics for Taiwanese and HP products in Europe through ports in which they have a presence, which is like Piraeus, which I talked about. Chinese also have in mind Italy as well for both sea-based and land-based connections. There is a 5 Ports Alliance, which is a major container terminal project in North Adriatic. That involves ports in Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia, and that appears to be a regional response to the new Silk Road. Then a freight train has started between Chengdu and Tilburg in April 2016. And in Poland, there is the Łódź, Chengdu, Xiamen, and also the Sutro-Warsaw connections. These started in September 2013. China has been promising financing of projects such as Central International Airport, high-speed rail, container terminals, and the establishment of industrial parks. In Spain itself, there is an interest in commercializing the tourist routes with linkages to the Silk Route. And a connectivity platform has also been set up by the EU as a response to the Chinese initiative, and several meetings have been held in that regard. How has the OBOR policy evolved? Judiciously, China had proposed that OBOR is complementary to European development plans, and has also invited suggestions from the Europeans themselves. And within OBOR, China targeted Eastern European and Mediterranean countries. The mechanism involves meeting with 16 Central and Eastern European countries, as also some who are not part of this mechanism, such as Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine, and also sectoral cooperation mechanisms, that is agriculture and maritime cooperation with the Southern European countries. Again, China has targeted the UK for its role in internationalizing the currency, renminbi, for its relevance to OBOR projects. By organizing international conferences, China gathers ideas which are helpful in fine-tuning its OBOR projects and capabilities. So on balance, many OBOR activities remain related to projects that were conceived before 2013, as far as infrastructure is concerned. But transportation hubs are developing in anticipation of Chinese financing. And the extent to which European firms will cooperate in Chinese-led projects in third countries, that, however, remains unclear. As the global context of Europe-China relations changes, transcontinental integration seems even more appealing to Europe. There have been shifting emphasis in Chinese investment patterns, and how has that happened? So what started off as an investment idea in infrastructure and connectivity under OBOR, as the Chinese looked at controlling the logistic chain for its export capabilities, has gradually transformed into a Chinese policy of encouragement for its companies and entities to acquire high-end and new technologies, and also advanced manufacturing capabilities along with infrastructure investments under the Belt and Road Initiative. Also projects that can facilitate Chinese exports. Now, as is well known, China is pursuing an ambitious plan called Made in China 2025. This is aimed at moving the Chinese economy away from the labor-intensive and low-value production towards higher value-add manufacturing in 10 key industries. So currently, riding on the back of this plan, China is emphasizing focus in Europe on areas like electric cars, machine tools, robotics, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, medical technology, railways, aerospace, advanced materials, and information technology. To become actually a global leader and kick off the next phase of China's development. Also, very notable, China has released the next generation artificial intelligence plan. That happened in July, which promises huge policy and financial state support in pursuit of expansive goals between now and 2030. And private enterprises and universities have been called upon to make China the world's primary artificial intelligence center. A joint research has been published by the New York-based research consultancy called Eurasia Group and also the Beijing-based Innovation Ventures, and this happened on 6th of December. That concludes that while China currently lags behind the US in engineering talent and hardware required to build effective autonomous artificial intelligence, robots, self-driving cars, and other physical machines, it actually enjoys the advantage of a massive pool of data due to high internet usage, mobile applications, deployment of robots at a rapid pace by Chinese manufacturers, thus making it inevitable that China will become the world leader in this field. The efforts reflect the view of Chinese officials that controlling global technologies and standards is on par with building military muscle. Since the opening of China under Deng Xiaoping, if you recall, it has made it a priority to obtain ideas and inspiration from overseas. And Chinese leaders now have made their intentions clear of using state funds to acquire technological capabilities overseas to bring them home and to replace foreign technology leaders in the medium term, not just in China but also in global export markets. By acquiring more technology from foreign companies and also encouraging local companies to make new products based on that technology, Chinese leaders hope to cement the country's dominance in critical fields. They also see an opportunity to dictate the terms of future development of technology and extract licensing fees from foreign firms that use Chinese-made technology. To reinforce the Made in China 2025 plan, besides using its growing wealth to buy into cutting-edge technologies, and this question Mr. Buthalingam raised it yesterday, China is moving ahead with creating special courts to handle intellectual property disputes and also awarding subsidies to entrepreneurs who file patent applications. What are the recent Chinese investments and acquisitions in Europe? So against this background, Chinese FDI into Europe has grown continuously over the last decade and has intensified lately. Overall, Chinese FDI went up by 40% to a record 180 billion euros in 2016 from the year earlier. And as far as Europe is concerned, according to a study which was released by the Mercator Institute of China Studies in Berlin and also the Rhodium Group, Chinese investments in European Union rose 77% to over 35 billion euros in 2016, with Germany accounting for 11 billion euros or 31% of total Chinese investments in Europe. After a period of large-scale investments in southern European economies, Chinese investors have refocused on the big three European economies, Germany, UK and France in 2016. And these three countries together accounted for 59% of the total investment value. Chinese investors have shown particularly strong interest in technology and advanced manufacturing assets. Biggest transactions, for example, were Tencent's euro 6.7 billion acquisition of Finnish gaming firm Supercell, Media's acquisition of German robotics company KUKA for 4.4 billion euro, HNA's acquisition of Irish aircraft leasing from Avalon, 2.3 billion euro, Beijing Enterprises purchase of Germany's EW Energy for 1.4 billion euro, and Ctrip's 1.6 billion acquisition of British travel platform Skyscanner. There are many more examples of takeovers in the high-tech field. Again, during President Xi Jinping's visit to the UK in 2015, Xi and Prime Minister David Cameron signed numerous deals for €4 billion, and among them was an agreement which facilitated Chinese funding and participation in a controversial nuclear project, the Hinkley-Point-C nuclear plant. The biggest overseas acquisition by Chinese investors so far has been state-owned ChemChina's 38 billion euro takeover of Swiss pesticide giant Syngenta, happened last year. In Italy, ChemChina bought the fifth largest tire maker, Pirelli, for 7.1 billion euro investment. And China has also bought up power grids firms which are Terna and Snam, turbine maker Ansaldo, and the Chinese central bank has acquired a number of small stakes in Italian blue chip companies. In the telecom field, Eni, Telecom, and Enel have also Chinese stakes. Huawei launched its first research center in Italy about the study of microwaves, making a lot of qualified engineers work for the Chinese future. And Premier Li Keqiang has expressed interest in Eastern Europe by announcing a new fund of Euro 11 billion because China views this region as a gateway to the larger Western European economies like Germany, France, and UK. So as part of this strategy, last year China signed a lot of deals with the Czech Republic, which were worth billions of euros. What has been the European reaction to Chinese investments and funding? Generally, Chinese companies bearing checkbooks have been welcomed in Europe. They provided a source of fresh capital for ailing European enterprises like Swedish car maker Volvo, I mentioned Italian tire maker Pirelli, French resort operator Club Med, Louvre Hotels, etc. And also the French construction, energy and logistic companies will also look forward to opportunity for Chinese investments. In fact, many European countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Europe, view China as a source of much needed funding. But at the same time, Chinese investments in Europe are also inviting scrutiny due to concerns about Chinese takeovers and the potential long-term impact of losing key industrial technologies to China. This has led to questions about how to treat bids that straddle between private investment and state-sponsored takeovers. It has also led to broader suspicions about the fate of the takeover targets, whether national leading industries in Europe will ultimately be absorbed into the supply chain in China. Some of China's high-profile takeovers in Europe in recent years, such as the acquisition of German robotics firm KUKA by China's media and appliance giant last year, have stoked a lot of concerns about the transfer of high-end sensitive technologies to the Chinese. Also concerns have arisen in Germany over transparency, origin of financial flows, patent rights, jobs, unfair competition, and the role of Chinese state-owned enterprises. In Germany, just to take an example, there is no compulsory registration for non-EU takeovers or investment unless there is a direct military link, which then requires a sector-specific review. In other cases, Germany's Ministry of Economic Affairs can initiate a cross-sector review on an acquisition by a non-EU investor only if it sees a potential threat to public security. So in that context, I'm going to give you an example of Extron, which was an aborted takeover. German Ministry of European Economic Affairs itself initiated the review in October 2016 regarding the takeover, the acquisition of semiconductor equipment supplier Extron by China's Fujian Grand Chip Investment Fund. And this deal would likely have been cleared without review had the US Committee on Foreign Investment not raised national security concerns in its own review because Extron also holds US assets. And the concerns related to Extron being a key supplier of certain gallium nitride technologies which are used by NATO defense contractors. The US blocked the Extron deal last December, and while Germany halted the takeover to review, China withdrew its bid. Extron is actually a university spin-off, employs hundreds of highly skilled engineers, and has a decades-long history of making the advanced tools needed to make semiconductors. To take a look at the history of this failed acquisition, one must bear in mind that shares in Extron had sank after a large order was cancelled by Sanan Optoelectronics, which is a Xiamen company, at the last minute when the company was facing a slowdown in 2015. And Fujian Grand Chip, another Chinese company, stepped in and offered an outright purchase. Later revelations have proved that Chinese government's program capital was at work in this case because Sanan has a number of connections to Fujian Grand Chip, including a common investor and an existing financial relationship. Fujian Grand Chip is 51% controlled by Liu Zhendong, a businessman with government connections, while the rest is held by Xiamen Bohao, a local government investment fund that itself has links to Sanan. So this is one such example. While countries like Germany are reviewing powers to block foreign acquisitions and using European measures to safeguard key technologies, after a spate of Chinese takeovers, changes will be limited given the government's commitment to free trade and the desire of the industry to remain open. Elsewhere in Europe, due to recent fears about China, deals worth euro 12 billion have been scrapped. President Hollande of France, for instance, had warned the Chinese hotel group Xinjiang against trying to acquire a majority in the French hotel chain Accor. And unlike the United States, however, Europe does not have a body similar to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US to scrutinize and to block foreign takeovers involving critical technologies. Matters have also become more complicated. Previously, Chinese government would dole out funds to several well-known state-owned companies for acquisitions abroad. And now these funds are being distributed through national and local investment funds, which give them out to and through smaller companies. And Chinese investments in the Eastern European and Mediterranean countries has also not allowed Europe to take a unified stand. Nevertheless, in February 2017, Germany, France and Italy presented the European Commission with a common position on screening investments from abroad. The joint letter outlined then that Europe is losing its advantage in technological know-how. It asked the Commission to review the possibility of member states being given the ability to block foreign investment on the basis of reciprocity, that is in cases where European countries have limited market access in the country of origin, which happens in the case of China. The letter reinforced a position that France had long represented, but illustrated the shift in Germany's traditionally open investment posture. And though China has not been mentioned specifically in the text, its recent acquisitions were clearly in the minds of all those who were drafting this letter. On 14 September 2017, Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, also called for the European Union to be given greater powers to review foreign investments. Again, although China was not specifically named, the concern was clearly towards China. And to quote Juncker, if a foreign state-owned company wants to purchase European harbor, part of an energy infrastructure or a defense technology firm, this should only happen in transparency, with scrutiny and debate, unquote. And at the moment it was difficult to conceive that a European body, EU body, could be given the powers to overrule member states who currently rely on national procedures or accept or reject foreign investment. So, while in the near term such a policy may not be possible, in the future Europe is looking at three scenarios in which it could do so. First is if there is a leakage abroad of sensitive technologies, like the case of Extron. Second is the ability of a foreign actor to manipulate or deny access to important supplies. For example, China's acquisition of Canadian rare earth mining company, which enabled it to withhold supplies to Japan when relations were tense. And thirdly, possibility of foreign surveillance or destructive malware, which is a concern for IT and for infrastructure systems. I think Arvind is going to talk about cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a good lead into it. You can land with water now.
Start from the water. I think the presentation of water actually reminded me of something very similar that is happening.
Down here.
Something that is happening in the cyberspace aspect. Actually, when I was researching for this topic, I found that information is very fragmented and incomplete. So it's very, very difficult to build a good complete knowledge about what is happening in the cybersecurity arena. But I think there is enough of coverage in the media over the last 2 years, which tends to indicate that there is a whole lot of concern in the world about the growing capabilities of China. Yeah. Okay. There's a whole lot of concern about the growing capabilities of China in the cyber area and how they will use it. But equally, if you talk to the Chinese, they are all also concerned that their own systems are also vulnerable. And they in fact complain that they are repeatedly the targets of cyber attacks from various countries. As far as the Chinese are concerned, I think they have been following this cyberspace developments since the 90s at least very closely. And two PLA colonels, Zhao Liang and Wang Xiangshu in 1999 talked about unrestricted warfare and indicated how a weaker country could defeat a technologically superior country without using hard military power. And their focus was on building cyberspace capabilities. Cyber and space capabilities also find repeated mention in the various defense white papers that the Chinese have issued recently. So they're not looking at cyber only in isolation. They're also looking at together with space. The Chinese view information systems and content as part of information security. So they don't talk about just the cyber security, which is more like a Western concept, but they talk about information security, which is a much larger concept. And they are concerned that a country with weak information security could be prey to destabilization in terms of the content. So while the West promotes the idea of an open internet, in China, I think they don't agree with this concept. And there the issue of control over internet is something that they very religiously adhere to. And over the years, they have developed both technologies as well as policies to enhance the control over the internet. They have focused heavily on the control of content in cyberspace. So they have developed the capabilities of online surveillance and real-time censorship. And that is an important aspect of their cybersecurity policies. So they have built, in some sense, they have built their own internet. The West continues to argue against fragmentation of internet, and the Chinese have gone ahead and built their own internet system, their own software, their own something like Facebooks or chat software, etc. So there is a lot of censorship and control that is going on. On technology front, China is trying to reduce its dependence on technologies imported from outside. At the same time, they don't have all the cutting edge technologies. And as Anil pointed out, they are going around and buying a lot of good R&D labs, R&D capabilities in other countries and enhancing their own capabilities. But at the same time, now they have come to a stage where they are investing a lot in their own capacities also. The Chinese have realized that they will require a huge amount of cyber professionals. Right now they have about 30,000, but they need about 700,000. Recently they have come up with a policy. They are in 7 universities in practically all parts of China. They are going to set up these institutions which will produce high quality, high-end cyber professionals. So they are moving in a very systematic manner in this area. They also realize that there are economic benefits to be had because after all they have benefited from globalization. They cannot be sundered from internet, so they can control what comes in and goes out in China. But they have built a large number of companies that are now internet challenging the Western giants. And through hardware and software, they are beginning to know their presence is almost everywhere. As you know, in India also, most of the cell phones are made in China. And I recently read that a Chinese company, unknown Chinese company, almost unknown in this part of the world, now it is selling the maximum number of cell phones in Africa. So in the African market, they have, I think, taken about 30% share of cell phones. So they have, of course, you know that networking components and hardware, and Huawei was also mentioned, and Huawei is bought many companies. So they are emerging as a major force in the cyberspace, ICT space generally in the world. R&D, I think, is also a very important part of their policies. They are, I don't have the figures on how much they are spending on cyber R&D, but overall R&D, they are now, I think, crossed 2% of the GDP mark, and they want to reach about 3%. And they have cyber, I think, is and I think semiconductors were also mentioned, artificial intelligence, robotics, etc. All this is now a very important part of their focus. And now they have, I believe, the world's largest robotic in one of the industrial parks in Kenya. They were the largest robotics company which has supplies a wide variety of robots to the world. It is going to become, it is already the largest. It is going to grow even further. So they are focusing on artificial intelligence and robotics. Of course, on cyber diplomacy, the Chinese are extremely active. As I said, they are very concerned that internet and free flow of information can be destabilizing for them. So they have joined hands with Russia and other Central Asian countries within the framework of SCO, and they have come up with a draft convention, which is essentially the control of state over the flow of information. And they have also promoted this idea of cyber sovereignty, which essentially means that all the information systems and information that resides within a country, the state has a complete sovereignty over that system. They have been promoting this idea of cyber sovereignty practically at every forum. They are very concerned about the present system of internet governance, which is essentially ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers. That is a private company which is a multi-stakeholder company, which was earlier being controlled by the US, but now I think it's undergoing some changes. But essentially all the root servers and all the infrastructure of, technical infrastructure of Internet is through these root servers. There are about 13 of them, and they are all in either USA or I think one in Sweden perhaps. The Chinese have been very concerned that the internet can be switched off by switching off any of these root servers, and all the domain names etc. are assigned by through a very complicated system of registering etc. So this is what the West calls a multi-stakeholder model. But the Chinese are engaging with the multi-stakeholder model with ICANN namely. But they are very concerned that the states should have a role of internet governance, and they are also looking at, along with the Russians, they are looking at some kind of a multilateral control over internet. But I think this is an issue which has deeply divided the internet, the West end, Chinese and Russia on the other hand. It is something that is still to be resolved. As you know, at the last UNGG, that is the UN Group on Governmental Experts, could not come up with a report, an agreed report on the norms, cyber norms. And this is because the Russians, the Chinese were not in agreement with the Western concept, essentially, which is of open internet. There was this issue of who will control basically the internet. So these issues, I think, have bedeviled the progress on norms. Although in the earlier version, that is GTE4, there was some progress and about 11 norms were agreed. But I think how to enforce those norms in a verifiable manner, that could not be agreed. And all the differences between China on one hand and the others came out very clearly in this UNGG. How have the Chinese, of course, I would also like to mention some, a symbol of Chinese capabilities, how far they have reached, which is the launch of the communication satellite by China last year. That was in I think August 2016. And very recently, just about 3-4 months ago, they were able to send out a message which was encrypted using quantum techniques and over a period of 750 minutes. The problem with the quantum communication has been that it would encrypt, which is unbreakable, by the way, unbreakable encryption. You could encrypt, but you could not send messages over long distance. At best, a few meters and improvement a few kilometers. But now by using that satellite, where they have very complicated, complex systems of sensors and generators of entangled photons and lasers, etc., and vision devices, and then all the ground systems, they have been able to send this message. Now, it's not that the Chinese are the only ones who have been working on this one. Many other countries also have been working on this area for the last 30 years. It's not something new. So the physics is known, the technology is known, but the Chinese were able to do it. It is because the Chinese have enacted a system of decision making right at the highest level. Is the prevention and cybersecurity. That has helped them to build many of these. Now that means all the funds are free. There is a lot of autonomy to these engineers and scientists to work on this, and they are able to do it. And their plan is that by 2030 they will have not one, but they will have several satellites on quantum communications. And basically they will also have a control over quantum communication. This 5G which is now coming up, I was told that the Chinese have already put in billions of dollars in infrastructure. And as a result of that, now they are setting the standard for the whole world. 5G standards are all going to be set by China. Every company in the world will have to really look at it. So I think they have this a system which I think works for them. And if you look at how the system has progressed or evolved over the years, I was able to collect some, maybe this is not a complete information here. A national level focus on information technology began first in 1986 with the establishment of State Economic Information Management Leading Small Group, and continued in 1999 and 2001 with the establishment and re-establishment of State Information Leading Group. In 2003, the State Network and Information Security Coordination Small Group was created as a subgroup under SILG, which is the Information Leading Group. And now this is chaired presently by Premier Chair. And there is, under President Xi, there is a small leading group on cyber security, which is now functioning. So I think the decision making is right at that level. And there is what brings me to the maritime SOA. I think Xi Jinping himself brought together all these various agencies after he became last, I think about 5 years ago. And the personal attention of Xi Jinping and others are exactly the same thing is happening. Then of course they had a document, something called a document 27, which was issued in 2003. And this concerned itself with the implementation of major cyber security related policies, national strategies, disaster recovery, incident management, e-government security plans, etc. And it was in, I think, 2002 that they set up China CERT. And we recently had a meeting with the China CERT. It's a fantastic organization. It has about 30 offices within China. And it is heavily involved in collaborations with AppCert, for instance, CERTs of the Asian countries, ASEAN countries, and even with India, in fact. We also have some kind of a cooperation with other CERTs. And their technology and the very cutting-edge technologies, instruments and machines that they are using. And they also are in close contact with the US. And that brings me to a very interesting point about US and China. US and China, as you know, have been, they have a complete mistrust as far as the cyber is concerned. And it was in 2015 when Xi Jinping was to go to the US. This was in the wake of some major attacks on the US Office of Personal Management, where 22 million sensitive records were stolen, and the attack on the Sony pictures, which also led to a lot of concern and anxiety in the US. At that point of time, and in fact, in absentia, the US even tried 5 Chinese engineers, and they even identified one PLA unit, which was actually doing all this. Although attribution in cyberspace is very difficult. Having done that, then they realized that I think it's better to talk. And then they set up a working group on cyber, and that working group has met many times, continues to meet. And I came to know that the Carnegie Mellon CERT, the US National CERT, and the Chinese National CERT, they have almost it's like a hotline almost. work with each other. So they don't want to also, get these things out of control. And this has been a very useful collaboration. And Chinese CERT also has proposed to the Indian CERT some kind of collaboration taking place. But they want to raise it to this level. And they want to, because the CERT is one area, place where all the information about all the vulnerabilities comes together. So it's a very useful information. So you have these databases, you have this, people don't be a little bit worried also as to how much collaboration you want to have on this one. But I think the Chinese have going around, and they told us that in AppCert, and particularly in ASEAN, they are having every single cert in ASEAN, and they are doing drills with them, they are doing training for them, they are basically incident response, exchange of information, the analysis of malware, all this, they are very active, and they want to do the same thing with India. Anyway, coming back to our some policy documents, then there was a new policy opinion in July 2012, which was issued by the State Council's Information Office. Now, this seemed to have been some kind of a critique. They were unhappy that certain targets, etc., have not been met, and some thing was laid down, some do's and don'ts were laid down for the other agencies, and this NPO, which became a document, really, which is for further improvement, etc. And then they had a new information security strategy on 27 February 2014, and where they again reviewed the entire cyber security, and I think they have taken a number of. I think there are a lot of. I'll just stop here. But I just want to end with one last point. And this is what is also mentioned, I think, made in China 2025. And the areas which Anil mentioned was, many of them, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, etc. But I think many of these areas will ride on cyber. Many of these areas will ride on ICT. Cybersecurity will be very important. But today, for China, cybersecurity equals national security. And this is one area in which I think we will see a lot more happening. And the Chinese, like in many other areas, will try and develop, particularly in the area of technology as well as policy and diplomacy. They will develop their capacities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for the reason I allowed them to run out a bit and cut into your question time was really because I thought all three of those presentations were fascinating. But for me, what was interesting was also the common elements across all three domains. Wherever you look, the Chinese are basically ending up doing what the US used to do. They set themselves outside the international legal system, whether it's UNCLOS or whether it's the present governance structure in the internet governance structure and so on. But then they use the existing system, and then they try and set the standards themselves. And again, it's across. They use a very centralized form of decision making at home to make this process efficient. And yet, if they're trying to behave like the US and doing exactly what the US, and in fact, the US still has more power in these domains than China does. Why is it China's actions that cause us so much disquiet, that we regard as not being benign? And I think that's what I'm wondering about, but I'll throw it open to everybody on the floor. Too many hands. Prasenjit?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Fascinating. All three presentations were, is it on? Is it on? Yeah. Okay. All three presentations were completely, I was completely taken by what, and looking from although these are all futuristic developments, but I think we have to look at them from a historical perspective. And I'm beginning to think that in this age of mutual deterrence at various levels, whether in fact the very nature of warfare or the meaning of war has changed, if in fact you can establish dominance, hegemony, even imperialism through dependence on information technology and connectivity, if in fact in the logistics supply chain you can embed so many modes of control that can disrupt it, if you can do all of these things, you can have all the control of resources without losing a single person or without shedding blood. Now this, it seems to me, is a very interesting new form of domination if in fact, I mean obviously this is an idealized version, and we know that world politics will remain and politics on the ground will remain. But I want you to, each of you to reflect on what are the vulnerabilities, and in particular, Dr. Gupta, the issue, you brought up two things. One is, of course, that China is able to do this and remain contained because of its cyber sovereignty issue. And the alternative model that the world has been trying has been multi-stakeholder. So, I mean, what are the, can the multi-stakeholder, is it more vulnerable than cyber sovereignty kind of issue? Or, you know, what about cyber terrorism or cyber hacking and so on? So what are the, to the extent that it's war, what are the oppositional forces going to be using?
Thank you very much. I think these are the issues which are being discussed all the time and raising a lot of uncertainty and anxiety all over. One is about the changing nature of warfare. That is absolutely right. In fact, perhaps the war is on. This is cyber race because it's a silent war, which is going on and you don't quite understand. Because attribution in the cyber space is very difficult. You really can't say that it's the Chinese who has attacked. You can only identify a server which might have attacked you. And the server might have been captured by somebody else who may be somewhere else. So borderless nature of cyberspace and difficulty in precise attribution. So it becomes very difficult to really identify the attack. And which means the war perhaps is on. And if you look at the developments since 2007 in the literature, they say that what happened in Estonia or in Georgia or in Stuxnet in Iran, that worm, and this was really an indication of a war. And who did it, what did it, I mean there are guesses of course, but I think war is on. And certainly cyber will be an extremely important part of the war. Now, the Chinese have not yet come out with a precise cyber doctrine. Actually, no one country has really come out with a cyber warfare doctrine, but it is certainly embedded in their overall military doctrines, which means the war might begin first by the attack. You know, as you said, without shedding blood, you can bring down the system. I recently came across a case where a blast furnace was captured. The system, the SCADA of the blast furnace in a steel plant was captured, and you could not switch off the blast furnace.
Yes. Where did that happen?
Where was it happening? I think somewhere in. I'm sorry, I can't remember where it happened, but it happened somewhere.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, the steel plant was damaged, and somebody could have been killed. It's just so. It's just a matter of time where a remotely controlled launched cyber attack will actually begin to kill people. And Stuxnet was really that the beginning, where you had a worm which was introduced, perhaps through a infected floppy or CD or something, into the Iranian centrifuges, the system which controlled the SCADA. And they started spinning faster, and many centrifuges were destroyed in the process. The temperature rose, and just imagine if this goes to a missile control system, or a nuclear command and control system, or a ship, or a satellite, or anything. What can happen? Now, this could be a scare scenario to a point because everybody is taking some steps also. But certainly, in terms of scenarios, I think this is today a very much possibility. When drones suddenly come down, now whether it is actually an accident or whether it is somebody, because to get into a drone system is not. So that is. Now the other part is the opposition to this.
Yes.
So that is where I think the defensive part of the cyber, which is actually much bigger challenge than the offensive part of it. Because you have to protect every computer, every network, and then you should control the cyberspace, you must know what is going wrong, etc., whether you have the capabilities and so on. But certainly, the Chinese have shown that they have what they call a great firewall of China, and which can kind of shield their networks from the rest. But here, a lot of it, you see, there are other criticalities involved here. One is the ISPs, because a lot of data, terabytes of data per second, is flowing through our internet service providers, and also this data is flowing through submarine subsea cables, and these cables are spread all over. And again, it's the private sector which owns these cables, and these cables then land at somebody's territory, and then they are allowed to pass. So I think civil-military fusion here is already beginning to happen. I think it's very difficult to today separate the civil from the military. So I think in terms of building your cyber assurance of frameworks, every country is trying to do that. You have to have a judicious mix of institutions, policies, and technologies and procedures. But it is still a work in progress.
My question to Dr. Chisako-san. You brought out a issue of jurisdictional water interpretation by China. In August 2016, there was a decision by Supreme Court of China which defined jurisdictional water, and among all things which you mentioned, also mentioned the historical jurisdiction. Now, China is already seeking suggestions for improvement of its maritime safety law, and the preambulatory paragraph of that law says that this will be applicable in China's jurisdictional water. Now, the question is the China's historical water jurisdiction with 9-dash line, though it is contentious, ambiguous, and not clarified by China. But what is your view on applicability of the envisaged maritime safety law in the jurisdictional water if we include the Supreme Court interpretation of historic waters?
Yeah, please.
I think the PCA's ruling on the 9-dash line was very shocking for China. In fact, I think the reason for China for pushing the island protection law was to gradually declare the territorial baseline for including the Spratlys and Scarboroughs. But because of this ruling, the possibility for China, the difficulty for China rised up. In fact, according to the source documents, China was actually preparing to make those the landfill islands into the real islands, because right after the law was established, SOA also released one document defining what are the islands and what are the reefs according to the Chinese domestic system. But what was interesting was that those definitions didn't ask the natural status of those features. So once you have created those, islands that are high tide seawater, then according to the Chinese domestic system, they could declare those features to be an island. However, this August, that document was abolished very quietly in China. One of my friends, who is a journalist, found it out. I think China is now going through a very quiet review about their new system on the island reclamation. So I think China is trying to figure out what they can do to consolidate its jurisdiction over the Spratlys and Scabrous in the near future. But I think the discussion is still going on at this moment.
Thank you. Sorry, I got the order which I see now.
Thank you. I learned a lot from all the three presentations.
No, no.
My question is to Dr. Chisako Masuru. You said that, if I understood you correctly, that as part of China's island management system, provinces were encouraged to create and develop a coastal economy. But at the same time, you said only something related to defense was allowed and non-defense was not allowed. Okay, so can you please elaborate that a little bit? How can you really separate between defense and non-defense? Thank you.
Thank you for asking this question. Maybe I wasn't very clear about the definitions. China created, based on the Island Protection Law in 2010, China created a whole new system to manage its own islands. And it categorized their claiming islands into basically 4 categories. And the islands for regular use are managed by the provincial governments. And each provinces had to make new action plans to promote the island economy based on the new system. And actually, they were under that system. Those provincial governments were allowed to lease out many of the islands. So the central government created the island list and made clear which island, if you use this size, and how much you can ask for the enterprises to win. And usually, according to the Chinese taxation system, the ratio for the provincial governments can get is very small. If you see the entire Chinese tax system, the 70% usually goes to the central government, and provincial government only can get 30%. However, according to that system, provincial governments could make 80%. So by using this economic system, the central government is actually pushing the provincial governments to develop more on the coastal economies. And while doing this, the central government is doing something very different on the islands for the defense use that are only allowed to use for the defense purposes. And I was talking about different islands, including the Spratlys, Scabrous, and Parasols.
Thank you. Sorry, I cut you. I saw you after these two gentlemen.
Thank you, panelists, all extremely fascinating. I've got 2 questions. They actually cover ground that everyone has spoken about. Just let me put them in sequence. One question is that these new technologies, whether it's Beidou, satellite navigation system, or the cyber system, or the new technologies that Ambassador Bhargava spoke about, that in terms of developing them, how much of the awareness of risk in developing these technologies, and how much of the risk management systems, the quality control, safety, ethical oversight, that kind of structure, how much of that has China built? So they're dealing with stuff like artificial intelligence, robotics, genetic manipulation, and so on, where even people like Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, and others have said, you're dealing with stuff which is existentially risky. Go wrong is big time. And we are led to believe, we don't know how, because these things are not very transparent, to the public at least, the West has some element of a ethical safety network in these things. We don't know how good that is. But does anyone know what is the Chinese state at play in this? Their past history on drug development and food security, etc., has not been hugely successful in that respect. So that is one question. Secondly, the technologies that they are developing, like Bezo and all these things, regardless of the fact that they are Chinese origin and developed there, on objective terms, performance, safety, transparency, control, how good are they compared to competition? Because if all these ASEAN countries, as Arvind said, they are going into these technologies, surely they, on their part, they have done some risk evaluation. They must have, I suppose. So how do they stack up on an objective basis against what is on offer elsewhere? Thank you.
I'm not going to go into the ethical standards in China because I don't know much about that at the moment. But in terms of acquisitions that have been made in high-tech areas in Europe, I'll give you an example of Ansaldo, which is an energy company, very high standard energy company in Italy. But the way the acquisition was done was the Chinese trained their people first in Ansaldo. And after that, Ansaldo engineers were in China for quite a number of years. That acquisition has actually gone on for a number of years till both of them learn about each other's working methods. They've also worked together in third countries. So in the process, the technology and practices along with the technologies has been transferred and is still in the process of being transferred. So it's not as if it's a certain kind of takeover. But in other fields, for example, when you're talking about robotics company, when you're talking about a design company, that's something that the Chinese have immediately wanted to take back because that gives them an edge in terms of competition. It gives them a market access which others will then seek, and it's a money-spinning process. So there are different approaches as far as these takeover efforts.
I don't have a direct answer to this question, but let me say that at least what I have read on the Chinese science and technology literature, on the cyber, etc., I have not seen the word ethics being used anywhere. So whether it exists or not, I cannot really say, but at least I am not very aware. But I think we should also say that right now China is a stage of development. I think they will regard all this as strategic, which means they will spend whatever is necessary to get hold of it. So I think they are not going to be totally guided by this market, practices, etc. At least that's why you see, their debt to GDP is something like 55%, etc. Because a lot of their companies are supported by the government, and perhaps they are not viable. But if they can get hold of a technology, get hold of a procedure, get hold of modern practices, they will take it because to establish themselves. And I think the risk competition, etc., will probably come a little bit later. The fact that this system seems to succeed for them is in this figure which I'm going to give you. If you look at the patents granted in 2015, this is the WIPO figure. China had a patent of 2,63,436, say 2.6 lakhs, rank 1. Japan had 1.46 lakhs, rank 2. US had 1.40, rank 3. India was 822, rank 25. So you can now, endeavor other countries. Which means this system, and these patents are high quality patents, they are global patents. And I think the system seems to be working for them. So they have put in a lot of effort on this. They are going to a stage now where they are actually beginning to invest in innovation. It's not just the reverse engineering. Reverse engineering also goes on. But now they are probably, in some areas at least, they are probably beginning to make original research and catch hold of particularly development. And these two examples, what she gave, when you had this submersible which went almost to 10,000 meters, and this quantum communication satellite. This would have happened just on the basis of reverse engineering.
Probably it's easier for me to answer how China is trying to promote this, for example, Beidou system. Well, China is basically trying to do it through the economic means. For example, in earlier periods, all the Chinese fishing vessels were requested to carry not only the GPS system but also Beidou system. And nowadays they're converting into the single Beidou system. And now China is pushing many African fishing vessels to carry this Beidou system because China plans to establish to have a global operation of Beidou system by the year 2020. And I think many developing countries are willing to accept that kind of support or provision of those equipments by China. But I think China is also trying to do it with some developing countries. For example, if the Arctic sea route is opened, and if China and Russia is in cooperation to establish new satellite system, I think many Japanese and Korean enterprises, cargo companies, are willing to accept to put a Beidou system in their vessels because that can actually enhance the safety for the vessels that might go through the Arctic region. So I think China is trying to make full use of those economic measures. But when we talk about this, the risk for developing those technologies, I think the biggest risk is in the high cost because China basically wants to create new system that can substitute American influence. But I think this also reminds me that historical tributary system that has been very costly to maintain the Chinese supremacy. So even though, I think if China can bear that kind of high cost, China regards those systems to be very safe once it is established. But I'm not sure if China can fully achieve it in the future or not.
I'm afraid we've already run past our time. I owe you an apology, but I don't think we can go on. I see the organizers are telling me. But I'm sure you all want to join me in thanking the panel for a really fascinating discussion.